So it's exactly 2 past the hour, and this is from clusters to CDNs. And we'll be talking about multi-tenancy deployments made easy with the Varnish Controller. So I said it before, but for those who have just joined, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time out of your obviously very busy schedules. And there's so many options in terms of webinars nowadays. So I'm really grateful that you picked this one. So in the next, I would say between 30 and 45 minutes, I'll be doing a live demo. Of course, there's a little bit of slide work ahead of time to set the context right and to make sure we all understand why we're here. First things first, I'm Thijs. I'm Belgian and I'm the technical evangelist here at Varnish Software. I've been doing this sort of work ever since the lockdown. We have plenty of experience with webinars. It's not a real thing, but I'll give it my all and I'll try to be a good evangelist to you. Today, I'll be talking about the Varnish Controller. Varnish Controller is our brand new product. And it's, if you will, the successor of the Varnish administration console. It is an improved version. It's actually a complete overhaul in which we want to build a management tool for managing multiple Varnish servers. Long gone are the days that problems were solved with a single server. Nowadays, if we talk about content delivery, which we will throughout this presentation, you'll have a lot more machinery, a lot more equipment at your disposal, and managing multiple systems is hard. Distributed systems are hard, and Varnish Controller tries to alleviate some of the stress and make the management easier. It is a product that we've been working on quite long, and we've laid out the foundations, and the first iteration of the product primarily focuses on VCL deployment. So what you're going to see is very much in the realm of VCL deployment, which is good because you have, if you're building a CDN, if you're building out a cluster, if you have multiple nodes, the deployment is what makes it hard. Now, this controller is actually an umbrella term, and it's a term that composes many different parts. See here, the end goal is to serve HTTP and HTTPS responses to the clients. And what the controller does, what this umbrella of services does, is provide the right configuration to the various Varnish servers, which are connected to the controller via agent software. So on any of these Varnish nodes, you'll have agent software running. Now, at the heart of the Varnish Controller is the brains, as we call it. It's a centralized component that speaks to a database and that keeps track of state. Now, all these components can be scaled individually, and they all communicate over a centralized message bus that we call the NATS message queue. It also talks to the agents. So the agents are in direct communication with the NATS message queue. So are the brains, as well as various other components that provide an interface, such as the API gateway and the controller dashboard. So in the end, if we zoom out, if we take the bird's eye view, the goal is to make sure that clients get served with the right stuff, with the right data, and for administrators to be able to manage all this via a browser, a CLI, or an API. Now, I mentioned before, I'll say it again, the first iteration of the product is primarily focused on VCL deployment. And there are some sort of key components and business logic in place that I would like to emphasize first, elaborate on before we actually get into the real deal. So at the left-hand side, you have agents, which are installed on servers, and on the right-hand side, you have VCL. The goal is to bring VCL to the agents, and there's various components in play to do that. VCL doesn't stand alone. It's part of a VCL group, contain multiple VCL files that can only be accessed either by the entire server or a specific set of domains. And those VCLs for those domains that are grouped in a VCL group will be sent to agents via a deployment. The actual link between an agent and deployment happens based on tags. So if an agent has tags and a deployment has tags, it will associate it in a one-to-many relationship, and the VCL will end up there. That is what we'll see. Now, again, this is only the first iteration. There's plenty more to come. And because we've built a solid foundation, we can do quick sprints and quickly add logic and actually make this into a fully integrated product. So any future development that happens, any product that gets developed at Varnish Software will eventually end up in the controller. First of which, I think in one of the future sprints is traffic routing and gluing all these servers together so that you have a full-blown CDN. And that is what we're going to do today. I'm not going to show you the traffic routing part directly. I have another component in play for that. But today we're going to build a private CDN. I'm not going to dive in too deep on why you want to build your own CDN, but it's very short. If you build your own CDN, a private CDN, it's not a shared service, but a dedicated CDN just for you. You have tight control. It's not a black box. You can tweak every component of it. It's also for people who might want to consider using regular CDNs, but who want to serve an area where CDN providers don't have the capacity, don't have the coverage. Or when you already have infrastructure and network capacity in place, it might make sense that you just install CDN software. And that is Varnish. And that is also what the controller will do for you. Speaking of which, this is what we're going to build today. Although I might be slightly exaggerating, because in the time we have in this 45 minutes, it's unlikely that I'll be setting up 3 points of presence, or POPs, if you will, manually. So for the sake of this demo, the US point of presence is already available. So is the APAC one. APAC stands for Asia Pacific. So Asia Pacific is hosted in Singapore. The US one is in the wonderful state of Virginia, and the EU one, which might be slightly controversial because of Brexit, will be hosted in London. So it's the European one, not necessarily the EU one. So we'll be setting up 5 servers, 2 edge servers, 3 storage servers. And it's important that you know what the roles of these machines are. The edge servers, as their name implies, are on the edge. They're as close to the user as possible to reduce latency as much as possible. Because we are building a CDN, we want to make sure that distances, physical distances and latency are taken away as much as possible to have a smooth experience, especially for things that are very sensitive to that, like online video, that matters. And as a matter of fact, I am going to build an online video CDN and play some OTT video stream. Because video is quite large, chances are that if you have a very large, if you're an OTT video on demand or provider, you might have terabytes, maybe even petabytes of data that is not going to fit into memory. So what we're doing is storing the hot segments in memory and everything else in the storage layer. The storage layer could be hosted disk with our proprietary MSC technology, but that doesn't matter in this case. What we're doing is we're using sharding technology, creating a consistent hash of the URL and making sure that every request for a URL coming into the edge, not being stored in cache, will always end up on the same storage server. So that means as you add storage servers, you're basically adding capacity to your CDN, so growing your storage. And that is something that we see quite often. So that's what we're going to do. But remember, the origin is all the way up in the US, and we're going to make sure that the EU has a copy stored in London and that APAC has a copy or multiple copies stored in Singapore. All of this will be glued together via GeoDNS. So I'm using Route 53 because this is all done in Amazon. Route 53 will have geo awareness, and for the www, whatever comes next, you'll be sent to the closest point of presence. So that's how this deal is going to work. Now, mind you, all of this will be done in AWS, but the focus is not really AWS. The key takeaway is that the Varnish controller can alleviate some of the stress related to VCL deployment, and that could work on AWS, in Azure, or even in non-cloud environments. Even for on-prem hardware, this will work just fine. So we're about 8 minutes into it. Without any further ado, let's get started, and let's introduce you to our stack. So a little bit of storytelling going on, but I will keep track of certain aspects. If we need to remind you of certain concepts, I can bring you back to the slides. So we all start with a server that we have, an origin server hosted in the US, and it has this goofy text. It doesn't really add much, but it's just for the sake of showing you that how these CDNs will work. So there's background images, there's a logo, there's CSS, there's JavaScript, and there's this text. It is hosted on the US origin, and the page render time, if I refresh the page, is 11 past 2, where it is hosted. It is we refresh it at this point, and apart from that, nothing special happens. But as we refresh, we also notice that this second counter increases. So that means it's not a cached version. What you also see is this video player. Undeniably, it has a play button. I'm going to mute the audio. And this is just royalty-free open source video anime that I've added a label. I have various versions of this footage. And this is HLS, HTTP live streaming protocol invented by Apple. And I need to show you the source so that you understand what is actually going on. So if I show you the source, of course, you have HTML, CSS, links to JavaScript. But the most important bits, maybe I could bump this up for you, is this video tag. This video tag has some attributes, but it also has a subtag called source. So we're actually loading video from a folder called HLS, and there is a M3U8 file called video US. And that is a playlist that is going to load all the video segments. This one big 15-minute video will be chopped up in little bits and pieces of 2 to 3 seconds. And that's how video streaming works. So if you have to fast forward throughout the video, you don't have to load the entire file. It will know based on the playlist, which I'll show you in a second, which items it needs to load. So as we play, files get loaded. So it's time to inspect and show you what we've got. So if I go to the network tab and I filter on all and I do a refresh, what is loaded? Of course, the page, then some CSS, JavaScript, some metadata, but also our M3U8 file. And if you look at the contents, it's just line delimited. It has some metadata like timestamps here, and also the files it needs to load. It needs to load file 0, file 1, knowing that this is 2 to 3 seconds worth of video footage. And it goes all the way down to 426 for this one. So those are all the files that eventually are going to get loaded if you go to the full video. If I start filtering on XHR, which implies AJAX calls, things that are triggered by this JavaScript library, and I press the video button, you will see that various files will be loaded. This is 2 to 3 seconds. I think it's 2.4 seconds worth of data. So you see all these TS files getting loaded. These can be rather big. If we look at their size, if it allows me, I think it's 2 megabytes, 1.2 megabytes per file times 400. So that's a lot of data. If it happens to be very popular video footage that thousands or maybe even millions of people are going to watch, that origin is not going to stand a chance and it's going to go down. So you need a caching layer, and Varnish is a great product for that. However, we want to reduce latency. If someone who is living in Asia Pacific, has to go to the United States to get the video with all the latency incurred, it might have an impact on the video. So we're building a CDN to make that happen. And that CDN has multiple servers, and it's all getting glued together via Route 53 in this case. So you'll see our endpoints, which I'll show you right now. We have an APAC record, apac.diy cdn varnishsoftware.com. Let me show you that. APAC DIY CDN varnishsoftware.com. And it has 2 IP addresses, notably the IP addresses of our edge servers. And the same applies to the US. The US also has these 2 IP addresses, but there's no point of presence for the EU yet. But also, we don't really care about US or APAC records. We care about www. So if you live in Asia, and if you go to www.diycvarnishsoftware.com, we'll be sending you to the APAC region on the condition that we match your client IP address's geolocation to Asia. We also check the availability of the entire region via health check, which I'll show you briefly in a minute. There's the same one for the United States, for that matter. So in here, same record, www, gets pointed to our US endpoint, which I just showed you has 2 IP addresses on the edge, if you live in North America, and if the zone is available through this health check. And finally, we have another www that also points to the United States, but that is just our default location. So if you're not in North America, and if you're not in Asia Pacific area, then we will be sending you to the United States endpoint. As a resident of the EU, that's not so convenient for me, so I'm going to build that CDN. But first thing I'll do is show you how all of this gets managed inside the Varnish Controller. Welcome to the Varnish Controller. As any good management software, you need a dashboard, of course. So it has metrics on traffic coming in, on popular servers, on misses, and so on and so forth. It has a collection of servers attached to it that all of this refers to. So if I click the servers menu item, I can see if memory serves me correctly, there should be 10 servers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The deployment configuration pre-tagged their region. So when I boot up a Varnish server, one of the specific ones, This one, the Varnish Enterprise, that is available in this case on the AWS Marketplace. If you have on-prem, you'll probably have a custom license key. It's available on different marketplaces as well. So if we bootstrap that one, in its configuration, it has its region. So it automatically knows this is a US server. However, I also tagged it according to the role. You have 2 edge servers here, 2 more edge servers, and the rest is just storage. So if you remember the slides correctly, let's bring you there. We have 5 nodes per POP, 2 edges, 3 storage, and that matches nicely. If I have a look at this one, for example, and I click it, you see its IP, its version, then it links to the deployment. Deployment configuration is called Edge APAC. It's being deployed in 2 servers, and it refers to this VCL file. Of course, there's tags here. I can link extra tags, and I can manage tags in the tags option right here, tags menu item. You can manage all your tags. I'll skip over configurations right now. I'll go back in a minute. You can manage domains. I mentioned that this is a multi-tenancy setup. So that means you can make sure that one Varnish node can host multiple websites, and the domains allow you to configure that. And there's also multi-tenancy in terms of access. So you can create accounts with custom permissions, which I'm not going to do now, but it's possible. Custom organization. So multi-tenancy from a consuming point of view, but also multi-tenancy from a management point of view. And of course, there is a VCL editor. This VCL editor allows you to keep track of a collection of VCL files. VCL, short for Varnish Configuration Language, it is the programming language that we use to determine the behavior of the cache. Now let's take you there. Like what you see here is a green cloud. That means this one has been deployed already. So if you make that we save, not only will it be saved, it will be deployed at the same time. What you see here is that the origin system that we're connecting to is, of course, origin DIY CDN. So it offloads that one. There's logic here for cache invalidation, which I will show you shortly. There's an artificial health check. So if the health checks of Route 53 go to health Z, it will just answer 200, everything's healthy. There's logic for stale if error. So if it turns out that the cache has expired and yet our backend is completely down, our origin is down, we can revive content in the cache and serve it past its lifetime, which is convenient. If the house is on fire, you need to make sure that that firefighting happens and that it seems as though everything is okay to the client. Then we have backend logic. If it turns out we're accessing an M3U8 file, we only cache it for a second in this case, because in case of live video, this M3UA file constantly gets updated. If it's a TS file, which is that video, that binary video format, we're going to cache it for a day, and we'll be associating cache tags to it for invalidation. So if we want to invalidate based on a key and we do HLS, which is the protocol, both M3U8 files and TS files and maybe other resources will be deleted at the same time. And so on and so forth. In the end, there's just a custom header that we're injecting here, X storage server with the IP. So if we consume something coming from the CDN, we can look at the header and see what server served it. There is a general storage VCL that can be used by all the storage servers, regardless of their location. However, I do have separate configurations for the edge, and that's because of sharding. If I click Edge US, I have multiple backends. I have storage 1, storage 0, storage 1, storage 2. Those are different IP addresses. And thanks to this logic, the shard director will kick in and will make sure that every request for the same URL always gets sent to one of these 3 at the same time. So it's consistent, which allows us, as I explained, to scale out, to horizontally scale out our caching capacity. And there's all sorts of other logic in here as well. Same for invalidation. Another interesting thing I did is I used one of our modules called XBody to modify the body of the response. So if you remember this one correctly, it says US origin. It was served from an origin in the United States. I'm actually going to change that once I deliver it via the CDN because I'm more interested in the POP. So when it says US origin, I'm going to replace it with US POP. And I'm going to do the same thing in APAC or something similar. Of course, these are different IP addresses, but I'm going to say here, APAC POP, just as a trick. You'll see that very shortly. And then I'm going to announce in the headers, not only the IP address, but also my region. So if I go to www, and I refresh this page, because there's no EU POP, I'll be served from the United States. So it says US POP. If I were, and I can do that right now, I guess, if I'll take you here, I have 3 machines. If I go to www.DIYCDNVarnishSoftware.com and I filter the region header, knowing that this right-hand side server is a server in the APAC region, I get APACs. So this is www. I can do the very same thing here. This is United States, US. This is Europe, this is London. Unfortunately, also US. So that has to change, and that is the goal of today. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create capacity. Now, I'm not going to do this from scratch. I have some stuff prepared. I'm going to use auto-scaling groups AWS, and the capacity at this point is 0. I have 0 servers in the EU. And we're going to set this to 5. We're going to have 5 nodes, 2 for edge and 3 for storage. So I click update, and it will be gradually updating its capacity. So it's updating its capacity. This could take a minute. Now, I'm going to show you the launch configuration. The launch configuration says that it is using specific AMI, which is that image. So again, these images come from here. In your situation, it could be just physical hardware standing there. I'm using stuff in the cloud. But what's interesting here for this demo is that I've assigned custom user data to it. So in Amazon, when you spin up machines, you can add user data, and added the variable Varnish Controller, in which I noted the endpoint of our controller, which is good because as soon as the server comes up, this data gets read, gets registered with the agent, and the agent already knows where to connect to, which is very powerful. And I'm already pre-tagging EU, which is cool. Now, let's see how fast this goes. Like, I'm going to go back to my Varnish Controller, and I click the servers button. We're not there yet. It might take a minute for it to kick in. So if I go instances now, I'm really hoping that the capacity is getting increased. Not yet. We have old servers that are terminated. Oh yeah, we're here. There's servers running. So if I go here and I refresh this page, here's me hoping that these systems have registered themselves already. Yes, they're coming in. Lucky us. As we speak, they get registered and the tags have been assigned. So at this point, we have 5 servers. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to prepare the VCL configuration for it. I'm going to the editor and I'm going to take APAC as a source of inspiration. So I'm just going to copy this VCL. That VCL could well be on your system and could be pushed to the controller via the API or via the CLI. I'm just going to use the editor. Call this edge EU.vcl, create the file, paste all the logic, but we need to apply certain changes. This is not going to be called APAC, but EU. And we're going to have to change the IP addresses, change their assignment to the shard director. Make sure that APAC POP is EU POP, APAC is EU, and then we need to figure out what the IP addresses are. So I'm going to open up a new tab and load the servers, and I'm going to filter. So I have this filter option where I will be filtering on EU, applying those changes, and then we only see those. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take, well, it's in my best interest to tag them first to make it easy. Like, I'm going to turn this into an edge server, go back. This one can be an edge server as well. And now we're going to configure the rest of them as storage servers. So this EU server in the list. And something interesting is going to happen. When I select storage, there is no specific EU storage VCL. There's only a single configuration for storage. So if I apply these changes, then it's automatically getting assigned to the VCL group, which was already deployed on 6 servers. And before we know it, It's in 7. So this server has automatically been grouped into the storage VCL group and has received its storage VCL already. But we have more. We have more of those. And exactly the same thing is going to happen. So as I tag these systems, they will become available to the configuration and benefit from automatic deployment. So I don't have to push the VCL. VCL is going to automatically be pushed to it. And then we have the final one. I promise you, if we look at the setup, we'll have 3 times 3 is 9 storage servers. We're already at level of 8. So if I select this one and turn it into storage, we are good. So it's deployed in 8, will be 9. So my responsibility at this point is figuring out what the IP addresses are of the storage servers in the EU. So again, I'm going to filter, select EU, and I have my servers. This is an IP address that is of particular interest to me. So this will be my first one. Number 2. And finally, number 3. That's it. That's our EU VCL configuration, which has been saved but not yet deployed. I'm saving it, but there's no real configuration attached to it. Something we still need to create. Another thing we need to do while we're here on the servers is we need to provide our DNS records, and that requires the IP addresses. So if you go back to Route 53, create a record, call it EU, then we just add the IP addresses here, right here, and then the other one. There we go. We have 2 IP addresses. I'm going to load TTLs for the sake of this demo, create a record. And what I will do next is create a record called www. This will be a CNAME, so a canonical name, which points to another host name, in this case, EU DIY CDN.varnish-software.com. And we're not going to use simple routing. No, we're going to go for geolocation. And we're going to select Europe. There we go. So this is targeted at Europe on the sole condition that the health check succeeds. Creating that record now, but it won't work because the health check will fail because we don't have anything deployed at this point. So we're going back to the controller and we're going to create a configuration. So I click configuration. There's APAC edge, US edge. Now we need EU edge. So I create the VCL group. We're going to turn this into a shared service. We're going to go for root, which means there's no domain attachments. It means the entire server is dedicated to this deployment, but we're not going to do that. We're going for multi-tenancy, just for the sake of it, of course. And I'm going to select EU, and I'm going to select www. And I'm fine with, as long as I have capacity to have the maximum of 100 servers to deploy to. So I select the tag, EU, edge, apply it. There's 2 servers that were matched, it makes perfect sense. And then I'm going to select the VCL file. I can upload a new one from my system, but I already have one in my repo here. There we go. Create and deploy. Please say a prayer to the demo gods, because this is happening live and we know that things can fail. Let's give it a minute. While it is deploying, it's been deployed to 1 server. And it has been deployed to the second one. Now, this will take a little bit of time because now Route 53 needs to kick in. I'm going to bring you to our health checks, which matter in this case. And the health check is unhealthy, of course, because it needs to be able to, every 10 seconds, it will try to poll it and see if it returns a 200 or 300. And it needs to succeed twice before it gets considered. So if I go to that health endpoint, try accessing it, not as easy as it looks. It replies with 200 healthy. So that's good. So eventually this is going to kick in. If I remove health and just go to the EU endpoint, well, I'm getting the EU POP as expected with that US version of the video footage, which is not all that bad. If we refresh the page, well, you see that this timer doesn't get updated. Whereas if I go to www and I refresh, oh, it goes faster than expected. I was expecting the US to still be present, but as you can see, the CDN works. And if I go to, let's see if I can show you, to www.DIYCDNVarnishSoftware.com, I'm getting the EU POP. So this works brilliantly. Now I'm going to prove to you, again, from my triple window here, see if that works. I'm going to send a request, left-hand side, EU, middle, US, right-hand side, Asia, EU, US, APAC. So we're calling the same domain name, the same URL from 3 different locations and being sent to 3 different endpoints. Point proven, this stuff works. Now I'm going to do something else here, which is unrelated to the controller, but interesting from a deployment perspective. Now we have this US version of the footage, but on the server, which I can show you right here, right now. If I do an ls, you can see that files, the JS, the CSS, PHP file that renders the output. There's also an HLS folder. So if I go to that HLS folder, I have all this footage. And the US footage is what is shown by default. But I also have another variant for the EU and the APAC, which has a different label on it. Like in a real life situation, this could be a different video because of different pre-roll ads or what have you. So I'm going to do this on the edge. I'm going to make these decisions on the edge. So I will be going to my editor for the EU in this case. And I'll be commenting out this line and I'll explain what that does. So knowing that these edge servers are in the EU, if someone tries to access a request URL that is /HLS video US M3U8, well, we're not going to show them the US version. We're going to override the URL and set it to EU. So if I save this, it might take a minute. A different URL is going to be called. So let's give it a go. Fingers crossed. I'm refreshing. And indeed, now I'm getting the EU version. That is a decision that was made for me on the edge. So if all of this goes quite flawlessly, I can show you more. Still have a bit of time. So if I do, let's bump up the font size. If I do curl -I for www, there is meta information in there. What do we know? Well, the backend returned a cache control header with SMAX 8600. Varnish will respect that and will cache this object for an hour. We have assigned Y key tags. This is for cache invalidation. I'll show you that in a second as well. And assigned this page with page and HLS. So if we invalidate a key by HLS value, not only will this page be removed, but you remember from the VCL that both the M3U8 file and the TS file will be removed. So we'll do that. That's a good example. Then what else have we got? The IP address of the storage server, which is interesting because if I change the URL, let's do a filter on that. X storage server, this is pretty much off the cuff. Doing it wrong. It's server 197, and it will always be server 197 if that one is called. Now, the thing is that this one is served from cache, but if you were to change the URL to something else, well, then we have a different storage server being called. And that's the horizontal scalability I was telling you about. The edge servers will be random based on what we got. So if I do a dig, DIYCDNVarnishSoftware.com, you see that we'll cycle through the IP addresses, one ending in 150, 45. So this just loops through and distributes the loads across the 2 edges, whereas the storage will be very much the same. I will do something else. I will bump up the capacity and show how easy that is. And meanwhile, then do cache invalidation. So let's go back to our instance here, to auto scaling group, and then increase the capacity. We don't want 5 servers. No, we want 6 servers. Maybe we want 3 edges, 3 edges in the EU and 3 storage servers. We're updating. And while this is updating, I'm going to invalidate the content. And eventually, when we go to servers here, a new one will pop up here that doesn't have a storage or edge tag associated with it. So how do we invalidate something from the cache? Like if I refresh the origin, well, it's easy, the timestamp gets updated. So we always have the latest version. Let's say something changes and we need to invalidate the www page. To do that, we're going to use the broadcaster. Now, the broadcaster is also part of the Varnish Enterprise product suite. As the name indicated, broadcasts messages to a variety of servers. What it does is it uses an inventory file, a nodes.com file, to know to which Varnish servers it should distribute that message. Luckily, in this use case, I'm using the Varnish Discovery tool, which is yet another utility of Varnish Enterprise that can automatically discover nodes, Varnish nodes based on certain context. It has an AWS plugin, so I'm plugging it into my auto scaling group, so it knows what servers I have automatically. And I've set one up. So if I go to instances, not only do you see all the old instances that have died and the new ones I have created, there's also broadcaster nodes, and that broadcaster node is per region. So I have a broadcaster in the EU, US, and in APAC. So let's do it. Let's remove one. See if I have anything in here. This looks a bit complicated. I will run it and we'll clear the screen, do it again so that you have enough screen real estate to see it for yourself. I am calling the EU broadcaster via this host name, but I'm also associating the right host header with it so that it knows it needs to remove stuff for www. And more importantly, it doesn't do a regular get method. We add a custom purge method, purge to the cache. Normally, Varnish would reply and have VCL to prove it to you. So if I go to the editor, there is purge logic in here, and it would say invalidated X number of objects are gone, or return purge. But in this case, it replies with all the systems that have received it. So basically, I removed something from the cache for the EU. I can prove that again. So if I go back to www, this 143205 is now 3906, and now I continuously refresh the page and nothing happens. So I can call it again and the cache will be invalidated. Mind you, this is just for the EU, so I could start adding multiple what my HTTP client on the command line supports. I can do the same thing by adding US. Let's do some copy paste magic. US and APAC. And if I run that, it's going to happen 3 times. So I send 3 calls, and in total, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 servers in this one, and then another 10, 16 servers have responded, and the entire cache for the homepage on my entire system is empty. Now, this is just for the homepage. If we want to use tagging for that, we can add a custom header, which is called Y. I think I need to cheat here and look at my editor. The key is called Y key purge. So if I do Y key purge and I mention the tag HLS, everything related to HLS will be gone. So that is the home page. Those are the M3U8 files, and all the TS files will no longer be in cache in the entirety of our CDN. So if I go back again and I refresh, page has been updated. Now, meanwhile, I think I've given it enough time. There is this lone server here. Our capacity was bumped. So we'll take its IP address. We're going to open it up and associate it with an edge tag. And it's automatically deploying into the 3rd server. And the only thing I need to do is go back to my hosted zone, edit my EU record, and just I did something wrong. This is the EU broadcaster. The EU record should be right here. Edit that one, add the IP address, save it, and all of a sudden we have 3 edge nodes. It's just that easy. We didn't have to bother looking at the VCL. We knew the VCL was right. We knew as long as we associated the tag, everything would work. Now, the final trick I'm going to show you before we end today is how we deal with disaster recovery. So remember these health checks that I showed you, which I will show you again. This EU health check is currently considered healthy, is pointing to that endpoint. And as long as the health Z returns the valid status code, this entire region is up and running. What I will do now is I'm going to use some trickery and make sure it's no longer up and running. So if I go to the EU and set this health to 503, which is not good, and then down or anything like that, and I press the button and I refresh health Z, it will say 503 down. Our Route 53 health check is going to pick that up. It's still considered healthy, but after a while it was. So if I do my dig call again for www, it still points at the EU. The EU supposedly is still available. But after that time, the US is going to kick in. So as the final thing we're going to do before we end it, we're going to wait until this one is clever enough, and that should happen within the next 20 or 30 seconds, that it considers it unhealthy. And then our entire EU region is going to come down, but that's not a problem because we've provided a failover. While this is all happening, I will show you that failover logic. So if I go back to the hosted zones, click here, remember that this EU record is only valid as long as the EU health check is valid. If that one fails, this record will no longer be returned. So what happens then? Luckily, we have a default, and this default location, and we can do it in a lot more elaborate ways. You can use failover, DNS settings, and what have you, will send me to the US. So that's what's going to happen. So I hope by now, yes, it has happened. So EU is gone, US is taking over. If I now go to www and I refresh, we're in the US again. And I think some caching is preventing. There we go. The video is also the US video. So that's it. We've just set up full-blown CDN. 2 POPs were already present. I didn't have enough time to set them up all by myself. And that's it. I would very much like to thank you for being part of it. And I hope I convinced you that building CDNs with Varnish is not that as hard as it seems. And I hope I could have convinced you that the Varnish Controller is an excellent tool that makes deployment to multiple Varnish servers, be it in regular clusters, be it in CDN setups, is very, very easy. Of course, more is to come. We are, our developers, our platforms team who is responsible for building this product is working on new features as we speak. And this entire routing via AWS Route 53 will be made a lot easier and a lot more integrated in the product in the future. With that being said, I would like to open it up for questions if there are any. There is in this lovely Zoom webinar tool, there is room for Q&A. I will try to respond to that. If you're shy or not interested in asking questions, don't worry. You can still reach me afterwards. You have my email address and my social media handle right there. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any specific questions. I'm going to wait a minute and ask my colleagues to also have a look at potential open questions. We'll give it 2 minutes. And if nothing pops up on the list of questions, we can assume that there are no questions, and I will then end this webinar. Anyway, thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. Not a lot went wrong, so I think our prayer to the demo gods paid off. And we'll give it 1 more minute. And yeah, I currently see no questions. So if you have a question, ask it right now. Now is your time. Otherwise, reach out to us. Aha, we have a question. So the question is how to scale an edge over 20 nodes. Is there a solution not to use a single IP address per node? Yes, of course, there are many solutions to deal with this. This scalability that I showed you is just an implementation detail. It's just, I used AWS in a, if I may admit, sometimes clunky way, because if you're going to do this in production, these auto-scaling groups are going to be associated with load balancers who are going to register this automatically. You can write Lambda scripts, which I have done in a trial run of this, where you can automatically synchronize the current state of the controller with what's happening in AWS. I just wanted to show you very verbosely how you do it semi-manually. But indeed, if you want to scale over 20 nodes, you're going to use different tools. If you're on AWS, I think it's safe to say that AWS's load balancers are going to be very helpful. And for any synchronization logic, Amazon Lambda serverless scripts and functions will be your best friend. But if you're on-premise with regular servers not in the cloud, it will all depend on the orchestration software that you have. So I think I've answered that question. I'm not sure if the answer pleases you, but what I've shown you is just an implementation detail. We have clients with well over 20 edge nodes, and it all depends on their use case. So sorry if that answer disappointed you. Then another question. Can you manage the backends without having to update the IP in the VCL file? Of course, you can. What you can for these, and I'm assuming that these are the storage nodes the question is about, you can use the Varnish Controller, the Varnish discovery tool for that as well. I've given this a try, but opted not to show it here, where it will automatically look at the auto-scaling group and rewrite the VL and automatically then via a Lambda script call the Varnish Controller and reload the configuration. So that is all possible. Meanwhile, we're also working on tools and routing tools to make that a lot easier. Our high availability tool is undergoing some feature updates, and it might be possible by the next iteration of our product to have a far better integration and a far better solution for that. So thank you for that question. I would like to take one more question, and other questions can be sent via email or social media. That's it, I guess. I kept my promise. I think we've spent 45 minutes on this. Thank you for being here. This video will be published on demand again. So if you want to look at it, look at some details, you'll get the link to the video in your mailbox. Thank you again for being here. Enjoy your day.